Back with the AZ Audibles crew. AZ Audibles brought to you by Ortho Arizona, Zach Elvira, Eric Sorensen. We're getting closer and closer to playoff football. First off, non-football real quick. Zach, a big birdie told me you might have stayed in a haunted hotel in Colorado this weekend. Is that what I heard?
I did not stay at the haunted hotel. I did visit a haunted hotel though. Up in Estes, Colorado. It was my first time ever being in Colorado in general, and it was beautiful. I loved it. Honestly, I could see myself potentially moving there at some point in my life. It was really that nice.
Okay. Any haunted hotel experiences for you, Eric, ever?
Yeah, I visited. It may have been the same one that Zach visited. It was the hotel. It wasn't in The Shining, but it was sort of the premise for the movie of The Shining. That was really cool. And yeah, like Zach said, Denver and that whole Denver area is just incredible.
Okay. Well, nothing spooky really going on in the high school football season right now, but I want to start here. The Open Division rankings, lots of discussions happening. Obviously, things can change over the next few weeks, and I think a lot of things will change as the computer sort of adjusts. But as things stand now, Highland, Saguaro, Hamilton, all out of the Open. Zach, I'll start with you, but do you think it remains that way, or do all three or some of these teams have a legit chance to get their way back in?
Yeah, it's kind of weird seeing those three teams on the outside looking in. Maybe not so much Highland, I guess I should say, but Hamilton, Saguaro for sure. I do think Saguaro is the one team that will not be in the Open this year. Now, that doesn't take away from the SaberCats' ability to win 6A by any means. Highland needs some help. They have to win out completely. I know they play ALA Queen Creek this week, and I think they still have a matchup, a couple other tough matchups down the road. And then Hamilton, obviously, you've got Chandler coming up. So, very big must-win games, especially this year where it really seems like the power has shifted from the East Valley to the West Valley, and you have those Liberties and Centennials, and right now you have obviously, two 5A programs contending for two open spots and 4A teams knocking on the door as well, whether they'll get it or not. I don't think they should personally, but we'll get to that. I know. But it is kind of strange to see those three teams on the outside looking in, but right now it's a must win for Hamilton and Highland if they want to actually make the Open Eight.
Guys, I see Saguaro as the definitely the team on the outside that's going to stay on the outside. They lost Mason Bray, their senior quarterback, and their schedule is not easy. They have Liberty, Salpointe, and Pinnacle. Those four teams are combined 17-4 to end the year. That's going to be a rough road for Zach Hill's crew. I look at Hamilton and I see a team that has taken care of business against teams they were supposed to. Really, their best win is over Perry. They have a loss to Basha. You flip it over to Highland. Highland has a win over Basha, and like Zach said, they've got a really tough one this week against ALA Queen Creek. But they end the season against Queen Creek and then against Desert Ridge, two teams they should beat. And weird stuff happens with Highland in the Open. I don't know, guys. I've been pining for Highland to get in the Open for like the last 11 years, even though the Open hasn't been around that long. And somehow they always just sneak into 6A and then just hoist that gold ball with that 6A title. So we'll see what happens this year.
So maybe I'm just playing kind of, the advocate for things because I know there's a lot of discussion about, whether there should even be an Open because usually it's 6A teams. But now, let's say Desert Edge, Desert Mountain stay in the Open and 6A, you end up with, let's say Hamilton or Highland, because I think one of them at least gets in the Open, and then Saguaro, and then you got teams like Perry. I mean, does that make it one of the most interesting 6As we had in the last few years since the Open? Because it feels like 6A's been, all right, Highland didn't make it. Here you go. And I know Chaparral took one from them, but it feels like it could make for a more interesting 6A. Do you kind of agree, Eric?
I definitely think so because there's a couple other teams. Although Pinnacle has a couple losses, that's a team that I think is going to be better by the end of the year. And I also look at Brophy. Brophy is a team that I don't think they're deserving of the Open, even if they win out. But Jason Jewell's team is big and physical, and they're another team to keep your eye on in 6A.
Yeah, Brophy is like Eric said, a very, I would say even a sleeper team at this point. Not many people are talking about the Broncos, even though, I mean, mostly because they weren't really that competitive against Basha, but still, that's a team that has size, they've got speed, they've got just a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. So that's a team to look out for. But here's kind of my logic behind everything. You have Highland, who knows what it feels like already to take that anger of being left out of the Open Division and turning it into two state championships. Hamilton, I'm sure they can channel the same type of anger. Saguaro, the same thing, but those two teams are used to being included. So instead of anger, will there be a sense of doubt? Will there be a sense of, oh, maybe we're not that good or whatever it may be, and they might play mind tricks on themselves? I know that's kind of maybe a far stretch a little bit, but Highland knows what it takes to, I guess, essentially get left out and then take that and turn it into a dominant postseason run. So I still think I nod the Hawks' way when it comes to the 6A title, but it's a lot closer than it has been in recent years. And obviously, like I said, Hamilton, Saguaro, you could even really throw Red Mountain in there because they've been super competitive this season. ALA Queen Creek, if they happen to somehow drop a game, they could be a 6A contender. So there's still so much that can happen, but definitely I would say I'm still going to lean the Hawks when it comes to the 6A title right now.
I want to take a look over at 4A because I think we can touch on something you mentioned earlier, Zach. And there's a few undefeated teams at the top of 4A, but you say none should get in the open. It looks like none will. I know 2 of the top 4 or 5, there's even pre-qualifiers saying a 3A school can't qualify for the open, even though they're in 4A now, but their enrollment's 3A schools. So there's already even the AIA kind of seems like they believe a 4A school shouldn't belong regardless of what the computer says. So how are you feeling about some of those top 4A teams right now?
Yeah, that was news to me when I saw that with Yuma Catholic, and I believe the other team was it Northwest Christian, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
It's kind of strange to see that, but when it comes down to the 4A conference, look, these teams are very good. They have the talent. Obviously, Yuma Catholic has that really talented pass rusher. But the thing that really stands out is the lack of depth compared to the bigger programs. I mean, you're talking about a lot of these kids going both ways. And if they have to go both ways against, let's be honest, they're not going to be a top 4 or 5 seed. They're going to go against the Liberties or the Centennials or, the Bashas or the Chandlers. I mean, you're going to see those teams if you're a 4A conference program. So it really isn't even about necessarily should they get in because of their talent or how much or what they've done schedule wise. It should be they just shouldn't get in because it's a safety issue at some point. I mean, you're talking about kids, like I said, going both ways against some of the top players and top programs in the state, and especially if it's Liberty. Liberty has run and clocked every program in Arizona so far. So what do you think they would do to a 4A program? And I'm not knocking on the 4A conference, but they at this point now the Open has served its purpose. It was supposed to get Saguaro matched up with those bigger 5A and 6A programs. It's done that. Saguaro's now 6A, so 4A conference I don't think needs to even be involved at this point.
Eric, I know you'd probably say a lot of the same. I'll start with you then here, and then to Zach too. Does the Open still belong then? That's the question that I'm left with at this point.
I think eventually the Open needs to go away. It's been fun, especially in the first few years, because like Zach said, it was created for Saguaro, and I think to a lesser extent, Zach, Centennial, who also just kind of had their way, just moving through teams and then getting into the playoffs and rolling everybody there. I remember piggybacking back to what Zach said. I remember I talked to Joseph Ortiz a couple of years ago, and he was at Cactus when Cactus made the Open. And he said they had like 42 varsity players. I mean, let's be honest. Let's not include any 4A teams in the Open. It just doesn't make sense. And the whole purpose of the Open wasn't to include, I think you can even make a case, some of the 5A schools that have made it, or even the undefeated 6A schools. Just because you're undefeated, that doesn't necessarily mean you're one of the top 8 teams in the state. And the Open has kind of shown that as it's played out the past few years.
Would you say the same things? Like, I know you kind of just talked about maybe it should go away, but do you feel like there even is a place for it? Should we just go back to 6A, 5A, 4A? Because it seems like it's going to be a 6A team winning the Open, a 5A team gets in, and then if another 5A team wins their title, and we're the state champs in 5A, but the other 5A teams that get in the Open say, nah, it probably would have been us. I don't know.
Yeah, and that was the argument the last couple of years with ALA Queen Creek also. I mean, that especially when it was Cactus and ALA that both made the Open, that probably would have been the 4A championship in all honesty. So I think eventually it will go away, but at the same time, the one thing holding it back is open enrollment. And David Hines, the executive director of the AIA, has always said as long as open enrollment exists, the Open's not going to go anywhere. I even floated around the idea of just taking the 16 best teams in the state. So basically the 16 teams that you would see, or 8 of them, I'm sorry, that would be in the Open division, and then another 8 at-large bids, and move them into just a completely different conference altogether. Let everyone make the playoffs. They go and beat on each other all season long. And then for another 4 weeks, we decide, who's the maybe 7A conference champion. So that way those 5A teams get a chance, those other maybe lower level 6A teams get a chance. I think that could be an option, but in all honesty, we really don't need it, especially if we're going to see 6A teams in it every single season.
And I think, guys, the lower levels of depth behind the Open is intriguing because a team like Casa Grande ended up winning the 4A title a few years ago when ALA and Cactus both made the Open. I don't know if Casa Grande would have beaten either of those teams. I believe that Casa Grande might have played Cactus during the year and lost fairly in a fairly one-sided game. So the Open, it allows teams the opportunity to say, yes, we made the Open, a 4A school. Yeah, we have the banner. That's cool. But it also on the back end allows a team that may not be the top 1 or 2 teams in 4A to reach the title game and win it like Casa Grande did just a couple of years ago.
And that'll be kind of the last thing we talk about here, 4A. I know we already got into the Open discussion on that a little bit, but from what you two see, if you've had a chance to watch these teams and kind of just seeing what you see on paper, who do you think is going to come away with the 4A title this year? Start with you, Eric.
Well, guys, my heart obviously tells me Arcadia. I mean, I'm an alum. They're undefeated. Come on. Like we had an eclipse over the weekend and Arcadia is 7-0 in football. Okay. Well, anyways, good job, Ray Brown. Big fan of what he's doing at the alma mater. But I really like Canyon del Oro. Dusty Peace has been running that program, has been successful in the past. They're battle tested. They're 7-0. They just beat Micah Mountain, who was undefeated. They opened the season with a win over Eastmark, the defending 3A state champs. They took out Amphi. They also have a win over Bradshaw Mountain, who's one of the top teams in Northern Arizona. They have a really good running back in Caden Luke. And their CDO is just going to run the ball and pound the rock. That's what they do. Obviously, their big horses, Sakili Woodard, their defensive stud, who's got some pretty big offers. And I just look at that team as a team that could really make some noise and possibly win the 4A title.
Yeah, and even just going off of what Eric said, the Canyon del Oro, I think, would be my pick as well. They've played more teams that essentially have that playoff caliber, maybe for a title contender type of feel to them. It really, Canyon del Oro has almost kind of gone back to what they did with Kadeem Carey as well, just running the ball right down everyone's throat, like Eric said. And especially against Micah Mountain, where they prove they can win those tight games and they can win, those emotional games as well. That's really going to help out when they get into the postseason. And again, not taking away anything from Yuma Catholic or even Northwest Christian, 2 very good football programs that will probably be semifinalists. One of them will, may make it to the championship depending on how the seeds fall. But Canyon del Oro right now would be my pick. They've been my number 1 team in 4A all season long, and that's how it's going to stay now that they're still undefeated.
That's Eric Sorensen, Zach Alvira. Guys, great stuff as always. Thank you for the discussion. That was AZ Audibles, brought to you by Ortho Arizona.